This is Breaking Down Security, and I am Brian Brake. Welcome back, listener. This is Brian and Mr. Betcher for an extra large, extra special episode of Breaking Down Security.
Yeah, we've never had so many guests on. That's crazy.
Know.
At one time.
I know. It's like our podcast had a baby and we've got little child processes running around all over the place. Little hackers all over the internets is joining us today. So let's get started. It's going to be a nice, big, long podcast. So I'd like to have everybody go around and introduce themselves. We're going to do ladies first. So please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Okay. Cheryl Biswas, you know me as Encrypted, and I'm all about shadow IT and data privacy and mainframes.
Oh, very nice. Chad?
I'm Chad Rickensrud, Big Indian Smalls on the Twitters. I am very much into the mainframe security. Prior to that was just general IT security, reverse engineering, malware, and that sort of stuff. And prior to that, just sort of general IT. And I'm excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you. Phil?
I guess that leaves me. I'm Phil, or you may know me as a Soldier of Fortran, or Mainframe 767, or that mainframe guy, or that guy that talked at DEF CON that one time about mainframes. That's me.
Very cool.
Mainframe security researcher officially, I guess, but I'm just a mainframe security guy.
But the Lord of ASCII art, right?
Well, ANSI art.
That's right. International treasure. International treasure. That's right. Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Yep.
That's going to be your new handle.
Yep.
Yeah. God, I hope so.
So the reason that I wanted you on is because I'm selfish. Like most podcasts, I like to know and learn about things. So the best way I do that is by inviting people on who know things about things. And this time we're all about mainframe security because it seems like there's a lot of companies, especially older companies or certain industry type companies that have mainframes. But I don't know, it seems to me that there's not a lot going on about how to secure them. And I thought today maybe we could talk about that. And maybe people who are pen testers who go into companies who have these, they don't just sit there and go, oh, well, okay, there's the box. I don't know what to do with it. And maybe we could talk a little bit about blue teamers and how they could, maybe get in there and further secure their mainframes, or maybe wrest control from the people who have the mainframes and actually do something with them.
I can give my little spiel before Chad gets in here, but
okay.
Long story short, there are a billion guides on how to secure the mainframe, right? There's guides on how to lock down RACF, and there's guides on how to lock down ACF2, and there's guides how to lock down JES2, and there's all these various components of the operating system that there's like from top to bottom. Like there's the dysystig, which is really good, but it doesn't cover all the applications. There's all these things out there that exist to help you secure the mainframe. And there's a famous guy, I can't remember his name, maybe Nigel Pentland, who said that the mainframe is not secure, but it's securable. Right? The challenge is who has done the securing and who is auditing that security. And the answer is the people who've done the security probably didn't grow up with the mainframe. And the people who are doing the auditing and the pen test and stuff, they definitely do not know what's going on behind the scenes. When I gave a talk at Black Hat about mainframe pen testing, and I asked a straw poll of the audience, and the question was, who here does mainframe auditing, security, anything like that? And all the hands go up. And then I asked them, well, who has actually ever sat down and set up a mainframe or done any kind of administrative activities on a mainframe? And all the hands went down. Right? So that's exactly it. So it's this, like, and then if you ask anyone at any talk, hey, how many people do Windows pen testing? All the hands go up. Well, how many of you have been an administrator of a Windows box? All the hands stay up. right? Because you sort of goes hand in hand. But this is the one platform, it's so inaccessible that the people who are responsible for making sure it's secure and making sure they're auditing it properly and doing pen testing and all that stuff don't have access to it. And that was this huge, big problem for me. So also it's kind of a critical platform for our financial infrastructure, travel, governments, all the big players. But that's why it was important for me, at least.
Very cool. And you've actually you've given talks on this. We'll have links to those. I'm sure they're on Iron Geek's site for this. How many years have you been doing pen testing for on mainframes and that?
About 4 years.
Oh, very cool. Okay. All right. And Cheryl, you've done some mainframe auditing and pen testing yourself, or?
No, actually, it's just been my exposure actually working in a shop and working in that environment. And then discovering it all anew with Phil when we met together for B-Sides and realizing everything he was talking about is very true. The fact is, if it's important, if it's critically important, it is on a mainframe. But what people don't understand is these things are alive and kicking. Yeah, they have a very unique culture and a very vulnerable attitude about their security culture that we really need to be aware of. And that's what I'm bringing. It's this awareness. It's the, hey, everybody else out there, like the 99% of the world, you guys got to wake up, and it can't just be Phil's voice with Chad's now talking about this. We really got to bring this to the forefront, and we got to start talking about pen testing mainframes.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Mr. Butcher, do you have any questions right now, or I was just going to let Chad go after it?
Well, I wanted to ask Chad, what's the job market like in the mainframe security space? I mean, is it a small niche, or are there there's tons of work and nobody to fill it, right?
Yeah, I think it depends. If you are, well, first of all, anybody with a reasonable amount of mainframe experience probably won't have a problem finding a job. I mean, the jobs are out there, and there's a great deal of people in those jobs right now that are closer to retirement than they are to the beginning of their career. And so anybody who has, some experience, or even frankly, those people who want to, I mean, there's one college, Marist College, that I know of in the United States that churns out graduates that are, sort of mainframe ready. Otherwise, it's kind of an on-the-job sort of thing. I haven't heard of anybody who wants to get into that field in general that can't. As far as what Phil and I are doing, which is straight up pen testing or even security research on the mainframe. I mean, it is a very small group of people that are doing that and talking about it or running businesses. And I would venture to say that between Phil and I, we probably know 99% of the firms or the major individuals that are doing this kind of work. I mean, Phil and I could name a dozen people right now, and if we wrote them all down, they would probably be the same 12 people. Who are the kind of premier faces in this industry, and a lot of them have been around for a long time, and only a few of them are really close to, if you looked at the Venn diagram, would overlap what we would consider the traditional security research or the traditional pen tester, traditional red team person in how they approach it. Right, a great deal of the mainframe security is still really kind of a blue team idea of. And maybe even pre-blue team, where it's more access and authorization, and not as much of securing all the other aspects of it, like the network and ports and those individual granular permissions, those kinds of things. And so as a complete culture, I feel like we're somewhere back in the early 90s, maybe, in terms of when Smashing the Stack came out, the original one, right? And those kinds of things. I mean, we're kind of in that area. So I think, for anybody who really wants to get into it, I think the sky is probably the limit. The trick is getting getting hours, right? I mean, it's like flying, right? It's like if you've ever known anybody who's flying and you want to get your multi-engine license, it's like the hard part is actually just getting it, like finding someplace and paying for it and getting on it. That's the hard part, is really getting on one of these things. Like Phil said, they're kind of obscure. They're hard to, you can't just download one.
So what I gather from your answer is if I actually go about teaching myself how to pen test a mainframe and I'm good at it at some point, there's no shortage of jobs I could
no
take.
doubt in my mind that you could get an in-house job immediately. And
for sure.
And I'm seeing that the external firms that do pen testing, like general pen testing, like the big firms, are taking an interest in it. And it's starting, as you might expect, with like the really big ones, right? The used to be like the big three or whatever, like the big auditing firms. I know that they already have people on staff who are starting to gravitate towards this, but the mid-tier ones, I've had conversations with a number of them, and they're getting it, and they're realizing that they could be out on a customer call and they say, oh, well, the mainframe's out of scope, don't worry about it. And what they were starting to realize, like, if they had somebody on their staff who understood it, they could probably pull that back into scope and add, quite a bit more time to their engagement and do the customer quite a bit more good, because these are non-trivial systems in terms of what they're responsible for, right?
Yeah, something I worked really hard at, especially in the beginning, and Chad is working on it as well, is just trying to bring awareness to people that you gotta, like, it's sort of, to me, it's always been a two-sided kind of burning the candles at both ends. You got to tell the pen testers, you can pen test this. There's no reason you can't, other than you don't know anything about it right now. But that's something you can fix. There's no other technological reason you shouldn't be pen testing these machines, right? They're just a computer, and they have full ports, and they're no different than a regular old computer. Although I'm going to get a never-ending streams of comments for that. But I've also been working from the other end, telling enterprises and other organizations, no, you should be asking and demanding that your mainframes get pen tested. Because if your core enterprise relies on it for anything, for like the quote unquote crown jewels of your enterprise, why is it not being pen tested? And if it's because there's a lack of skill set in your environment, well, you can staff up to fix that or get an outside consulting firm. And we've started to see some, finally, after me talking about it for many years, there is finally some movement in that space where companies are starting to say, well, yeah, we should get this looked at. Why aren't we looking at it? Yeah, we've got this Windows environment locked down now because it's been audited and pen tested to death. But we've got this giant black box we've never looked at, and it has far more data than our Windows environment ever did. Why aren't we looking at it?
Now, could it be because companies, it's so mission critical to companies? I mean, if it breaks, it's a pain in the ass to fix or have, people get access to come in and fix.
I like to use the analogy I've used. Phil's heard this 100 times. I'm sorry, Phil, but the analogy I like to use is like, it's the Ferrari, right? So it's like you saved your whole life to buy like a $200,000 Ferrari. You bring it home, and it's like, first thing you do is not going to be like take it apart and see, I'm going to see what makes this thing tick, right? I'm just going to start, wrenching on it and bolt. I mean, you're going to drive it maybe fast with your friends on Sunday and wash it, put it back in the garage. Cause like, it's really expensive, and it's a temperamental machine. It's highly complex. And it can get away from you. All those kinds of things apply here. I mean, they're very expensive. People can't just buy a couple of them so they got one to play with. Generally speaking, they have one. A lot of places have their development environments, are one in the same with their production environments, or split only logically. And so they don't really have that luxury. And yes, for the most part, in a lot of companies, insurance companies, banks, airlines, whatever, if these things are down, they're not doing business, or they're not doing their primary business, right? And so they, it's kind of one of those things, like they can't really afford to have a lab, or to have one they can just kind of bang on. So they secure it with all the best practices and all the documentation that Phil mentioned. But they can't do, in my judgment, and what I've seen is they can't do that which we've come to expect now in every other platform, which is the over and above research, right? The reverse engineering, the the fuzzing, the, taking the patches apart bolt by bolt, the what happens if I do this kind of stuff. That is not only a different mindset, but even the people who have that mindset in this area, it's very difficult to get the equipment then to do that with.
Mm-hmm.
And
Can
on,
you still
top of
buy
that,
a
there's
mainframe?
Sorry?
you can.
Oh, yeah.
You can.
Yeah. Okay.
All the time. People are buying. IBM just released like a brand new one this year.
They get a new one out every
not this year, 2015. Okay.
But
Same OS and same commands and all that as they were.
Oh, yeah.
The OS is the neat thing about the OS. So it's called ZOS. Prior to that, it was MVS. It actually all the code written back in 30, 40 years ago will still run on today's mainframe. So they add new instructions and they enhance the feature set, but it's way backwards compatible. And that's kind of how, once these large, these organizations have these systems in from the get-go, they just kind of upgrade them and keep them going. They don't have to rewrite huge portions of their code base on a regular basis just because they moved from a 24 to a 31 to a 64-bit architecture. They could still run the same programs. And the hardware just keeps getting faster and faster, and the OS keeps adding more and more features. Mm-hmm. So they can also create new stuff that does amazing things, like mobile and like online banking and all this other kind of really cool stuff, but they can still run their bread and butter. But yeah, they release new hardware every couple of years. They release a new version of the OS every couple of years. I think an entry level one is like $75,000.
Oh,
I think that's right. I'm sure I'll get a bunch of notices if I'm wrong, but it's really close to that in terms of what the actual hardware, the small business version.
Yeah, for the actual hardware and licensing and all that itself. Yeah,
I think that would get you into one.
Yeah. But okay. So one of the things Cheryl alluded to is also the culture, right? About if you look, IBM touts it as one of the most secure platforms on the planet. All these people say it's the most secure. It's very secure in terms of all these things, and in the same breath, we'll say, well, you can't touch it because you could bring it down, and that was something that always bothered me, especially as an auditor, but even more so now doing pen testing. It always bothered me when someone would say, well, it's super secure, but you can't touch it. And I said, well, if me just touching it brings it down, then it's not secure, because that's an easy denial of service attack that I can do and bring down your core environment, right? Like, so when I first started, there was definitely an uphill battle in terms of participating in that culture. And I was always worried about the friction that I would get from the culture. Now, I've met a bunch of people, and the culture wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Online, it's a little toxic. In person, the people are really great. So it's kind of tough. But Chad can talk to this as well. But there's always that nervous feeling when you're emailing the mailing list about something you saw, and you're worried about what the people who've been doing this for 40 years are going to say.
Well, thou shalt not question IBM, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And you know what? I mean, in their defense, and I have a great relationship with them, and I have a lot of respect for all the people at IBM. They actually are ahead of a lot of their constituents. It's most of the time it's the old guard. It's the people who've been doing the job, whatever the job is, for 40, 50, 60 years, that have all the knowledge, but also like there's a lot of, they're not all like this, but there's a lot of like, well, this is the way it's worked for this long. Like, it's kind of that, it's that example that you've probably heard before, where you say like, look, if there's this 10 character field, if I put 11 characters in it, it crashes, and it kind of crashes in a bad way, which in an open systems or Windows environment, you might be like, maybe there's something I can use there. And if you ask somebody about that who's been in the mainframe world for a while, they're probably going to say to you, well, don't put 11 characters in it.
Yeah.
So
it won't crash.
So Cheryl, you've gone into organizations, obviously, do you do auditing and stuff? So, what is it like when you ask them, okay, I'm here for a PCI audit, and you have a mainframe, and they tell you that it's not in scope? How do you get a company to say, okay, yeah, it's really in scope. We need to do audits on these. How does an audit or something like that go for compliance, or how do you make sure that they're all doing at least the minimum required to pass an audit? And do you ever find organizations where they're like, really, truly, that's just the box in the corner. As long as it still beeps and says "Bing," it's good. We don't try to touch it.
Well, the fact is that my experience hasn't come up against anything different than what we've described here. The mainframe is treated separately. People will audit Windows boxes, and I mean, the expectation around compliance checks, unfortunately, has been, it's been pretty small groups, smaller attitude toward it, that it's going to be checkbox and let's just do the minimum required. And a mainframe, if a lot of our customers don't have mainframes. So when I was in the mainframe shop, there were people who handled the mainframe. And if you were not on that list, you did not go near the mainframe. You didn't touch it. It really was that closely guarded. And there would be no pen at that time. Certainly there was no pen testing. There was no consideration of that. Very much so. You were not going to bring it down. I knew guys who were 60 years old and punch cards. They had literally lived through the era of punch cards. There was such an attitude of, we're not going to break this thing. We're just going to follow the rules, because if we deviate, it will come crashing down. And I have seen what happens actually when it does come crashing down. And let's just say trains were backed up in yards. So
wow,
that kind of hits point home.
So is a mainframe even an IT asset, or is it managed by another group that just happens to have a mainframe expert in it? I mean, if it's a financial asset, or if it's mainly done by finance, are the people who manage the mainframe in an entirely different department than IT?
Not anymore. I mean, it used to be that there was like, like 1,000 years ago, before anybody had computers on their desks. I mean, they're only in the beginning, Brian, there was the mainframe and it was good, and that was it, right? And then it came along like all of these other computers, and people started going, whoa, what's going on? But you have to understand, like in the beginning, it was very much like, if you talked about data center operations or back office operations, I mean, that's all it was. So the little fiefdoms that Cheryl talks about grew up because they were the original ones and they were in place, right? They was their castle and their moat. And now, I mean, everything else is very much, kind of interplays, and it's very much part of IT all the way around. In most shops, it's probably still has its own sort of, group of people, where you might have a bunch of sysadmins that work on a bunch of different Linux boxes or Windows boxes. The mainframe folks are only working on the mainframe generally, and there's almost no overlap with any other platform. It's very much an IT asset. It's very much treated like the rest of the IT assets now. But the difference is like, so a couple good examples. So Phil and I have pen tested mainframes before, and what's really interesting is like, so you might have a mainframe that runs, so mainframes run Java, right? I mean, and just the same Java you get on everything else. So you might find a Java exploit that's the same exact exploit that would work on any other box. Then maybe you can launch your own jar file, and maybe you can get a command shell. The thing is, like, anybody with Metasploit and a reasonable amount of knowledge could get that far. The trick is, then what do you do? Yep. And we field, like both of us field calls or just random people all the time saying, hey, I work at XYZ company. I'm pen testing mainframes, and I managed to get a shell. I'm corresponding with a guy right now who's doing this very same thing. I managed to get a shell, but I don't know what to do now. And it's like literally, well, try this command. Okay, what do you see? Okay, here's a file that would be interesting. You can pull this off, and so those are the kinds of things that Phil and I sort of set as our vision, if you will, if you pardon the term, is like, look, this is a huge learning curve, right? And that's why, we were joking before the podcast that, people would call Phil and say, I want to get into this. And then like he'd return their calls and you'd never hear from them again. And it's because it's a huge learning curve, right? And so we both want to sort of evangelize and spread the word, but we're also building tools and adding to the body of knowledge out there so that the next person that comes in and gets into this can say, hey, I found out there's some modules in Metasploit, or I see all these other tools, or Nmap now handles mainframes. So there's one step forward now that I don't have to go and redo all the legwork to, so we can get it more in the hands of people that are doing pen testing, that they don't have to spend years sort of getting up to speed on at least, the high level of navigating their way around. Because it is a tremendous learning curve, and it's not intuitive. It's like learning a different language, like a completely different language. And the only things that are common are very, very, very low level things. They have CPUs and memory and disk.
They have TCP/IP.
Yeah, but that's about it.
Yeah.
So what do you guys see most in mainframes? Is it known exploits and they just haven't been updated in 15 years? Or do you see more configuration anomalies where you can find your way onto a mainframe because it's misconfigured?
So there's a great talk by Dominic White about weaknesses in the TN3270 protocol, for lack of a better term. And it's basically TN3270 is that green screen you use when you access a mainframe, right? It's that pretty green screen stuff. That all the security, all the stuff that locks down what you see, what you can interact with, that's all done client side on the mainframe. So he went in and found a couple of vulnerable apps that let you modify fields that were quote unquote hidden from the user, but still sent to the terminal. They just were hidden from the user. So he just changed the source code to X3270 to display those fields and make them editable so he could click on it. And now he could actually access pages, screens he didn't have access to previously, right? He's written a tool called BIRP, B-I-R-P, Big Iron Reconnaissance and Pwnage, for doing these kind of things. Is the attack new? No, it's been around on websites since websites existed, right? You have session IDs hidden as hidden fields within web pages, right? I mean, this is not new attacks. It's just the terminology is new, and you have to get your head around, well, what's a green screen? What is 3270? But the attacks aren't really generally new attacks once you start thinking and translating it back to something you might know, right? Like what Chad was saying, we're trying to get the language out there so people can talk the talk. But if I want to go pen test, WordPress right now, there's like 101 resources for me to do that. And that doesn't exist for this platform yet.
Yeah. So what, all right. So you said that a lot of companies, it's like, this is a precious snowflake. We don't touch it because it'll break. What kind of company, takes the mainframe, and go, you know what, we probably need to have this done. I mean, what's the method, or what's the mindset of a company that is, they must have had nothing else on their audit, and they're like, you know what, let's just screw it. Let's just do the mainframe.
Let me put it this way. It's the people who have been saying it's a special snowflake and how dare you look at this thing and don't touch it. They are not the decision makers. They're the advisors. They're telling other entities, say, for example, you have an application that's being audited and the back end is on the mainframe. That person will say, well, do we need to look at the mainframe? And the person will say, no, you can't touch it. It's out of scope. From an engineer who's got 30 plus years experience on the platform. They'll take that guy's advice. Now, technically, he probably just doesn't want an audit. He probably doesn't want anyone looking at it. He doesn't want some 24-year-old kid who's got a checklist who works at a Big Four consulting firm running through a checklist of items saying things like, show me who has the root account in ZOS, which is not a thing that exists, right? I mean, they have privileged accounts, but it's not, you can't say root account to a mainframe, you'll get left out of the meeting.
Okay.
So oftentimes, especially in my experience, so a quick example, I was working to get standard port scans run at a previous employer, and we were told, no, we will not let you do port scans on the box. What we will do instead is we will give you a report of open ports from the system.
Okay.
And we were trying to understand, well, you can give us what's open ports, but can you tell us what's running behind those ports? Well, yes, but it's going to take us 5 months to write up something that will give you a nice report to do that. And that's how I was able to convince them. Well, and so it ended up being said, okay, fine, you can do that, but we're still going to give you an issue that your system could be taken down by a port scan, because that's what you're telling us. The rationale for not letting us scan it is we could take it down. That's a risk to the organization. So we'll just put that as one of your high risk items that audit's going to look at every year. And they said, well, hold on, it's not that precious. And eventually we started doing port scans. But I dealt with it, and everyone deals with it when they start out new, is you take the mainframer's word on everything, and not all of them are I'm not going to speak for all of them because I don't want to make blanket statements. But in my experience, doing this for like 10 years, sometimes I would be told half truths, or maybe not the full answer to my question. And so that's where the challenges kind of lie, is what I was dealing with. But there's no reason today why that platform should be out of scope for any reason.
So, there have been anecdotal, not anecdotal, there have been actual stories of Nmap crashing a TCP/IP process or something like that, quite a few years ago, whatever. And then those become sort of like, well, we're not going to do this. But I think that two things come into play all the time. One is that it's more that they don't understand, and that there isn't really a destructive testing methodology in the mindset of the people that operate the system. So pen testing it is kind of like, well, you're maybe using it in a way that it wasn't meant to be used. So there's a little bit of fear of the unknown there. And then it is like the most critical thing, it's like, if you were gonna, quote unquote, try something on one of the organs on your body, probably you wouldn't start with your heart, right? I mean, It's kind of like, your home surgery kit, like maybe you pull up a toe first or something. And it's kind of like that. I mean, it's sort of like, okay, the risk reward thing. Like, do we really think it's that much of a risk that if we screw something up, and we have an outage or something like that? So I think some of it comes out of fear as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did change control. And so it's like the tortoise and the hare. For a box that is super powerful at processing, making changes in that environment is moving like a tortoise. And if you just have to hear somebody say the dreaded words, Kix is having an event, or worse than this, IMS1 is down, which is like DEF CON time, and you see red lights flashing. They treat it with the utmost conservative attitude. It takes a very, very long time to process a change. The planning is massive. I went through Y2K in that environment. Wow. We had a manual, and I swear to God, it was 3.5 inches thick. No, probably bigger than that for the level of changes. And everybody was on hand, and you were expected to be at your stations. It was handled with military precision.
Oh, yes.
So question to the both of you guys. Do you guys know what Kix or IMS is?
No, I was gonna. As soon as we got a lull in the action, I was gonna ask some terminology questions about what Kix and
because I can imagine you have a whole bunch of listeners, and like maybe 5% are going, "Yeah, that's bad. A Kix a pen, that's terrible. That would be devastating for us." And then you have the rest of the audience going like, "I don't know what that means or why that would be bad."
There was some English in there. I recognize that. Yeah. All right. So what is Kix? What is IMS? There was a couple of other things. I want to suggest EBCDIC maybe, because that's kind of a thing. And that's one I know that me and Mr. Betcher had to deal with somewhat. So maybe we do some terminology,
I'll take Kix because it's, or I've heard the whatever you call it is regional. So I'm from Canada and they call it Kix in Canada, but I've heard it called SIX in other places and CICS in other places. But it's CICS. It's kind of what web pages are now before web pages exist. If you ever go to like Costco and you're like, you need to like update, or you forgot your membership and they're looking you up on like a green screen application, and they're typing you in, right? And they're typing in your user ID, and then it comes up with all your information. That's what Kix is. It has what are called transactions, and you put in a transaction name, and it takes you to, without better terms, basically a web page that has inputs. And then you put in your inputs, and then you get an output. Or sometimes you put in inputs, and it takes you to other transactions that process that input and give you information. That's all Kix is, right? It's not. It's way more complicated than that. But for the quick rundown, that's what it is. And it's businesses use it everywhere for a lot of transaction processing across the board. So it's really important to industry, a lot of industries.
Okay. And IMS1, Cheryl, maybe you could,
So you're talking logical partitions or LPARs as they're referred to. That as I recall it. So we had it two basic giant halves controlling millions and millions of users and processes. And if something went wrong on one of these logical partitions, IMS1 or IMS2, everything would come to a crashing halt. So that's how we understood it.
Okay, and hard drives are called something else. I'm looking at
they call it hard drives. I mean, they refer to it as a DASD, which is direct access storage.
Storage.
So I mean, the hard drive inside your PC, Brian, is DASD, right? All it means is that it's not switched. Well, I mean, they kind of are, but it's not like a NAS device. It is a storage device. It's not tape, right? It's not removable. It's directly connected to the bus that is the host. And so, yeah, you have to learn things like that, right? IMS, which is a database, right? It's a flat relative database, hierarchical database, as opposed to like a, like Oracle relational database.
Right.
Kix is like an application server. You have TSO, which is like your sign-on screen, right? So the original mainframe had only one address space, and so everybody kind of like there was a shared memory, so everybody had to share it. So TSO stood for time sharing option. So if you wanted to submit something, like you submitted something and then you waited, and then like the system kind of like went around and serviced everybody's thing, right? Now it just kind of refers to like the your logon screen. But there's other stuff that you hear. You hear people talk about JCL. Which is kind of like the scripting language, if you will, since a job control language. So if you think about like your shell scripts and stuff that you do, kind of what JCL does. There's a lot of common things, right? Like C is C and C++ is C++, and COBOL, even though most people probably don't use it, is still, you probably know what it is, and a lot of the networking stuff, MQ, and there's another thing that a lot of people don't know is that the actual kernel of the ZOS, which supports kind of two faces. One is the traditional mainframe interface, which people refer to as MVS, but the other one is what they called OMVS, which was OpenMVS, or now they call USS, which is Unix System Services, and it is very much a Unix interface. So it's sort of two faces to the same system. You can access files across each one. You can run jobs and programs on each one. And access files and things on the other side or whatever. So there's quite a bit of complication that comes with that from a security perspective. But there's also a lot of familiarity. Like when I started, it was a place for me to kind of dip my toe in because I understood Unix really well. So I was like, hey, I know how to navigate around this. This is familiar to me, where the other side of it is not as familiar. But the other thing that's kind of really interesting, we talk about all this stuff, is you'll find what the aha moments for me were a lot of this stuff in the mainframe, once you figure out what it is and you relate it to something that exists in open systems or Windows, and you realize like it's the same thing. It's just that the mainframe were there first. If you talk to mainframe people about like what a novel idea in the last few years virtualization is, like they'll laugh at you, rightfully so, because logical partitions, which is a virtualized operating system, have been around for a long time in the mainframe. Or you talk about CICS, which is like an application server, transaction server like SOAP and those kinds of stuff. It's been around for a long time as well. The idea of having virtual memory, right, has been around for a long time. And so they've done a lot of these things well and have it kind of nailed down. But the trick has always been where, and I think this is the thing that's the big aha for a lot of people who get into this, is that when you're doing Windows or when you're using Linux or whatever, there's a tremendous amount of stuff that is completely obfuscated or encapsulated from you. Like if you format a disk, if you connect a drive and format it, even if you do that from the command line, which is like, pretty low level for a Linux user, that is like, if there's 5 steps in connecting a disk and partitioning it and formatting it in Linux, on COS, there's probably a team of people doing that, right? Because it's like you're dealing with things at a far lower level. Like you have granular control over absolutely everything, from every level on, up, and down. And so that's the hardest part, is getting your head around the fact that the system isn't going to do anything for you, right? Like you have to really understand what you're doing, and then it's very powerful in that way. But there are not a lot of wizards.
Well, you've got a great quote, right? It's installing the tool. If installing the tool is easy, then you're not doing it on a mainframe, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
How many red books, Chad? How many red books?
Right. TCP/IP has like 11 books, and there's something like, I forget how many tens of thousands of pages, and it's like how many megs just for TCP/IP. So that's where we try to do some simple things, cookbook style things to help people sort of just get started, so they don't have to go through that. Phil and I just had a conversation the other day. We're talking about some new thing that we wanted to delve into, and it was like, look, we know this guy who's an expert in it. We could just go ask him, which both of us don't really like to do. We like to just kind of figure it out, and then so we have the deep knowledge. But it's like, look, do I want to take 2 weeks to figure out what this thing is? And I'm not exaggerating. Or I could just, for this thing, I really just need to get to point B. I'm just going to go ask somebody to kind of help me get there, because everything you learn from scratch there's
no like, here's a quick FAQ on how to secure TCP, secure FTP. You have to the 1,200 page book on FTP services, and then the 1,300 page book on TCP/IP, and then you will have enough knowledge to then go secure it yourself. There's no FAQ on how to do it step by step. That's just the way they do it, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I like it. I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no FAQs, and there's no nice, easy index searching that exists in other things and other manuals.
So if I program in C and I don't know how to do something, I go to Google it, right? And there's probably 20 or 30 links to tell me how to do that one thing, and I just choose the top one, and usually I'll get to it pretty quick, right? Within minutes. Mainframe,
within the
I
first
guess, is
3 pages, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so one of you had mentioned that you had this guy and he called and he emailed you and he asked, well, I got this shell now, what do I do?
Yeah.
Could you walk through exactly what you told him to do? I mean, because obviously there's going to be pen testers out there who are going to be exactly the same. Hey, I got this shell. Awesome. What do I do with it now?
Yeah, so the question that he was asking about, so he was able to get, this guy was able to get SSH access, which when you SSH to the system, you're SSHing to the Unix side of the system. You remember I said there's it has kind of 2 sides to it.
Yeah.
And it very much has 2 different file systems. And one of the big things you learn pretty quickly is what are the different ways to get different types of objects between the Unix style file system, which is what we know, and it looks just like what you would expect, and the ZOS file system, which has a whole bunch of different kinds of types of files over there, and it's a completely sort of different file system, for lack of a better word. And so the question he was asking was like, look, I want to get this particular file from the MVS side of it, and I have SSH access. How can I do that? And we talked through a number of things, and basically, there's not a direct way to do it, but if you can execute commands, and if you have SSH access, then you can probably execute commands. Then you can copy the file, onto the Unix side, and then you can like SFTP it off. If you have direct, like the old school FTP, not SFTP, but like old original FTP, you can transfer files from either side with FTP. But if you only have SSH access, then you have to do it through a command. Like there isn't an easy way to get a file from the MVS side of it. From the SSH side, though, you can also issue commands like TSO commands, and so it's kind of just helping him walk through enumerating it. But understand that is like, and he was asking all the right questions. But that is like if you popped your first shell and you didn't know any of the basic bash commands or where any of the juicy files lived or whatever. I mean, it'd be a big scary world out there, and that's kind of it, right? I mean, that's kind of it. So it's kind of the things that Phil and I are working on. I mean, right now we've got some disparate tool set, and we've got a few things that we've put into some bigger aggregate tools like Nmap and Metasploit, and we're really working towards doing more of that, so that fellas like this guy could say, hey, I got credentials, and you say, great, now go plug them into this Metasploit module, and this thing can do the heavy lifting as far as like pulling off a file or a user database or whatever, and then you can run that through, John the Ripper and crack passwords or whatever, and you don't have to understand all the underlying commands, because there's it's huge.
And that's a good point, because I'm glad you brought that up. Your experiences, especially you, Phil, with RACF and the way that security is laid out, and the expectation that again, you can't. What are you going to do to crack passwords? You had some interesting stories about that.
Well, it was a guy got in trouble with the law for that, but it started innocently. I was just, when I started and I was like, well, what's the first thing I want to do if I get, without a better term, root access to a box? Well, I'm going to steal the shadow file and crack the password hashes, and then I'm going to see what else I can use that for. And I started thinking like, well, maybe I should what would it take to do that for RACF? And like Chad was saying, disparate tools existed. Right. To do that. So it wasn't like you couldn't do it. Like CrackF and RACF Snow, which were great tools, can do the database cracking. But for me, it was less about, and to Chad's point, it was less about, let's get the database cracked. It's already been done. It was more about getting people's awareness so that when they encounter the system, they don't have to spend 10 years, because you're doing a 2-week pen test. You don't have 10 years to bone up on the platform. But when you do, when you're doing that, you can just pull up and go, oh yeah, John the Ripper supports this. Great, done. And then if you really want to learn more about it, you can go and the source code is available for you to look at. And then you can go, oh, okay, I understand what's going on behind the scenes. Like Chad's saying, if there's Metasploit modules, sure, there's going to be a bunch of script kiddies who don't know what they're doing and they're firing things off and they may or may not work. But for other people, a lot of people will take the time to go through Kali and read the new modules and find out what it does and how it does it. And just having that exposure to people, to me, is kind of important, because it exposes them to something that they probably wouldn't get exposure to otherwise. And I have a blog and people come to the blog, and Chad has a blog and people go to that blog and stuff like that. But if it's a lot of the time people are lazy, if it's not coming to them, they don't know to seek it out unless they heard about it because they saw it on a podcast.
Cool.
Yeah.
So does Nessus have a credential scanning feature for mainframes or any other vulnerability scanner?
None of the ones that I'm aware of. So, okay, I'll just say for sure Qualys and Nessus don't support ZOS. I don't know
if they found
others.
any vulnerabilities, it would be of the kind I mentioned earlier, like if you had Tomcat running.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't know that Tomcat is anything other than Tomcat running on Linux or anything else. Like it might find those.
Yeah.
Or if you had if you had SSH configured to use like wide open or version 1 or no passwords or some crazy thing, like it could find that because those are standards. Or if you were running with an invalid certificate, those are standards. But anything that's really platform specific that doesn't exist anywhere else, they're not going to be part of the major tools unless it's something that we've probably put there recently.
To anyone listening, if you work for a large enterprise that has a mainframe and you want to know what vulnerabilities, like new vulnerabilities or what new security weaknesses come out for the platform, IBM has a mechanism to tell you about them, but you have to sign up for it and get approval from the appropriate individuals within your organization. It's called the IBM Security Portal, and you should be able to get access to it, but you have to work for a large enterprise that runs this platform. They really keep those, and they won't even tell you what the patch is for, and they just tell you that the patch exists on this product, and here's the CVSS score. That's it. But at least if you're managing or responsible for patching or risk ranking or whatever, at least you'll have that information available to you.
Well, that's interesting. They have a CVSS score for a mainframe, and then you have to go and do a proper risk analysis and risk management to find out, how that affects your organization. Obviously, you're not running a bog standard mainframe. Everybody's got their own different versions, right?
Yeah, no one is.
No one is.
So you have to know exactly what's going on in your OS. I mean, or in your mainframe and what's running on it. If you've got any additional packages.
And that's not the problem, right? I mean, I'll guarantee you the people that run their mainframes know them well. Like they know. That's not the issue. The issue is, and this is one of the things where Phil and I kind of vehemently disagree with the way that IBM is doing this, is that,
and others, not just IBM.
Yeah, is that, but I mean, they're very much back in the like, just trust us. Here's a fix for something. It's important. It's like a 4 on a scale from 1 to 5 or whatever. And it's part of TCP/IP, but that's all we're going to tell you, right? I mean, if you look at like Patch Tuesday, they give you it's a remote code execution. It's part of it's part of terminal services. It can happen to anything on this patch level and higher. Proof of concepts exist. They don't tell you how to do it, but they give you a tremendous amount of information about the vector and how it's done. You don't get anywhere near that amount of information on this. And so the hard part is like, if you're advising somebody on this, do you tell them like, well, you need to drop everything and put this on, and then maybe they have an outage because, if you have to patch something urgently, there's no guarantee that it's going to work. And a lot of these patches that come out get superseded, and so like the original patch might make something worse. Or do you sit and hold off, but really that was something you needed to apply, and now you got your lunch handed to you. I mean, those are the kinds of things that people struggle with in the Windows and open systems world all the time, but they have a lot more information with which to make that decision.
But it gives you a false sense of security, or it gives the admins a false sense of security because they're like, well, I don't even know what this is for. There's no exploit for it that they're telling me. They're keeping it a secret, so probably no one else knows about it. So who's gonna figure this out and actually try to hack? Probably nobody.
So maybe we'll patch it. Maybe we'll put on a bunch of patches like once a year or a couple times a year or something. Whatever, but the thing is, like, with any patching or with any security patching especially, information is the name of the game, right? Like, have we seen it in the wild? Are there proofs of concepts out there? Exactly what is the vector and how hard is it to exploit? Is there a Metasploit module for it? Like those kinds of things allow the average system administrator to make very educated decisions on how to patch their system. And that level of detail isn't out there. And if you ask IBM why it's not out there, they'll tell you because their customers don't want it. Because their customers like the obscurity, the relative obscurity of the system. So they don't want to broadcast, well, this, we've got this Achilles heel and it's exactly right here, blah, blah, blah. And I get that to some degree. But my counter argument is always like, well, you're assuming you're the first person that's found this. Like, what makes you think that there isn't a bad guy state actor somewhere that's already got a list of these things, right? And so that's how the whole bug bounty and, independent researcher movement came along, is like the companies realized that it's a lot easier to pay people to, find their vulnerabilities and test them, or at least encourage them to do that, than it is to, sort of fight them and find out the hard way that it's already in the wild. And I think it's just an evolution that has to happen, but it isn't there yet.
There was a breach of a mainframe over in Sweden, and I've talked about it at length in multiple conferences. And it was a really interesting talk on the IBM main mailing list about being told there's like 2 CVEs, and this one is, I was just looking it up, CVE 2012 5955. I think that's 5955. And if you look for that and you find the patch number and you search for the patch number, you'll get a link to a Google Groups discussion discussing about the patch. Should we install it? Now, this was, mind you, a 0-day exploit against the WebSphere web server that allowed you to do remote code execution and remote command execution. You didn't even need anything special. You just needed a semicolon. So pretty bad, pretty big deal, really bad for lots of web-facing mainframes. People were discussing, well, I didn't know about this because I'm not part of the IBM security portal. And I didn't know about this because no one told us about it. Or I've installed it, but it's going to be sitting in test for a little bit while we make sure it doesn't break anything before we move it to production. Whereas if that came out, like Heartbleed came out, how long did it take for people to fix production?
It was almost instantaneous. They were like, oh, don't even bother testing it. It's got to go out.
Exactly. And that was just information leak, not even command execution. So there was no debate on, well, should we install this or I'm going to wait and see how this plays out in test before we install this in production. No, there was definite action. Whereas you can see in that whole email thread, there's people talking. Now, other people obviously did install it, but because there's none of that, and I hate to say it, that compliance pressure that you see on the Windows and Linux side, not only compliance, but also cultural pressure from the security community and also pressure from malware developers. Because you don't see that, there's less maybe concern. Now, that's not to say the patching is bad. The patching on the environment is way ahead of Linux and Windows in terms of patching the system and knowing what patches are installed and what you need to patch and what products you have installed and whether or not those products are up to date on their patches. It's really good. But the rest of the enterprise environment may not be aware of what's going on in terms of these security updates and what's coming out.
You call it security by obscurity. You even had a term for it, like obscurity.
Oh yeah, obscurity.
Yeah, obscurity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Cheryl, you worked with mainframes at one of your previous careers. What was doing upgrades like? I mean, you said you did change management. What was that like? A halt to all operations? We were going to push out a patch was going to be very disruptive, or was it a lot like Oracle databases in most organizations where you're behind about a year and a half on patches and nobody really wants to do it because it's really going to break something?
Ooh. From what I could see, it depended what the nature was. If we were going to put through a fix, we had to look at scheduling, like thinking about scheduling downtime and consulting when it would be convenient for all of those customers who were relying on the systems, right? So you had to put things into the request hopper months in advance.
Oh my.
And to plan to take something down and to plan a rollback meticulously. So there were one request could be several pages long in terms of the steps outlined, and it would be thrown right back at you if you failed to include all of the pertinent information. And that was the culture. And the easiest things that I saw, like if we knew we were going to have a major fix going through, that might have happened maybe twice a year because you knew you had to schedule a considerable chunk of outage time. And it wasn't uncommon to come in on after a massive change. We would be on call for a massive change control weekend like that.
Mm-hmm. So you just bring your sleeping bags and expect to sleep in your office.
Yeah, people. Yeah, that did happen to people. I thankfully was low enough on the totem pole not to have to undergo that. I
Okay.
got to see the people who did, and they were, a Monday morning, unshaven and unshowered, and very unhappy because if something went wrong
Yeah.
and you could tell on Friday that they were expecting something to go wrong. That didn't happen typically. That would be more the exception to the rule because nobody ever wanted that to be the case.
Yeah.
But sometimes there would be a major fix that you knew you had to do and you knew it was not going to go well.
Okay. So I'm going to throw out some things here. So are there any emulators that would emulate a mainframe? If there are none, or if there are some, is there other ways of getting, say, getting time on a box to be able to just, I don't know, poke around or whatever? I know universities have supercomputers, but are there any organizations that give free mainframe time that you?
Well, there's
learn
some
these
that
things?
are pretty much open on the internet. You just got to Shodan them, right?
Oh, wow.
Well, you know what's funny? Shodan doesn't really support. It kind of does because I've been working on it. But the answer to your question is yes and yes. There's two emulators that exist. There's one called Hercules, which is an open source, really great project maintained by the Tron guy, if you know who that is. And it's a great project. It emulates the hardware environment, and it actually lets you create fake hard drive images and all that stuff. You can run what's called MVS Turnkey or MVS 380 on it, which is basically public domain mainframe operating system on it. Then on top of beyond that, IBM offers a product, and it goes by many names. I don't know why, but it's called ZPDT, RD&T, RDTZ. I think.
Are you reading an eye chart or something? Was that an eye?
No. Though. So the
Elemento J say K, S dollar sign.
The reason I'm saying all the names is if you work for a large enterprise and you have a mainframe, you have access to this product, almost guaranteed.
Okay.
And so to set up your own sort of like pen testing environment, you can lease it and get licensing for it for, I don't know how much money. Right now, if you're a private individual and want to lease it, we were just looking at it the other day, it's $5,000 to lease it for yourself for a year. But it's totally legit. It comes with its own emulator. RDT or RDTZ, it stands for Rational Developer and Test for System Z. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a test environment to do ZOS development. Now, if you're looking for online systems, so you don't have to pay $5,000, IBM runs what they call the Master the Mainframe contest every year. And this year was the first year that it was open to not just college students. And it's a yearly contest. Now, I don't know if you don't go to college, I don't think you can compete in the prizes, but you can actually do all the lessons. And it's really a great resource to learn sort of the basics of mainframes. In fact, when people ask me, like, how do I do this? I point them to their tutorials on how to do stuff because it's a great resource. It's Master the Mainframe. And then there are other places you can look if you're just typing in like, test mainframe or online mainframe login, you should be able to find one. I won't call out anyone specifically because I don't know if they're in good standing or whatnot. But if you know how to use Google, you can find them fairly easily, and then go from there.
So, Chad, you got any interesting stories about, poning all the mainframes?
Yeah, the one thing that I think is kind of interesting is that, and I think your co-host had asked about it earlier, is that, the things we've been talking about are a lot of configuration and tools and that sort of stuff. What there really isn't is any significant culture or body of work done in the research and exploit development area. And I think it's a really interesting area because of the differences in the CPU, the differences in the OS, the differences in the culture and that sort of thing. And so it's where I've spent a great deal of my time. And so I don't have any great stories to tell you about it, but what I've got is like it's kind of, if anybody's really interested or really wants to get into something like this is like a really good time and a really good thing to get into, because it's like a lot of people I know who've looked back on like the old smashing the stack for fun and profit or those kinds of things. Like, man, if you're a nerd like me, you know, it would have been really cool to be in on the like beginning of that, or like to have been the person who found that, right? But here's an opportunity for that, because they're just not out there. So for those people that like to really, who like to live and, you know, debuggers, disassemblers and, you know, read manuals and assembly and kind of live in that area. I mean, this is a fantastic place to be right now. So I would encourage anybody who wants to do that to like give us a holler, or, you know, just start digging in, because it is absolutely fantastic. Everybody I talked to about this, you know, are really, really amazed by it. You know, our talk at DEF CON this year, I set out basically a year ago, and I was just like, look, what's like first base? And I was like, you know, has anybody ever done like a buffer overflow, like just like a garden variety textbook, first thing you learn in exploit school kind of thing?
Right.
And I couldn't find anything, and I talked to Phil, and Phil didn't know of anything, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna write one. You know, just like I'm gonna write the program, and then I'm gonna write the exploit for it. And it turns out it's not as easy as it is in a lot of other systems, because there's a lot of differences in the architecture, but it's doable, and I did it. And a lot of the other things are doable as well. But you just, you know, it's like you kind of gotta want to have that, you're built that way where you want to go and figure these things out. And then it's like, if there's not a tool out there that does it, you know, if you're looking for a debugger, disassembler in Windows, it's like you can kind of pick and choose whatever you like. I like Ollie or Immunity, or I like IDA because I can afford it, you know. And if you're on COS, and it's like, well, I hate this one and I hate this one a little bit less, and I hate this one like a little less than the other one, but I really hate it. And so it's kind of like, okay, well, you know, if you don't like it, you basically got to just roll your own, right? So that's kind of a neat part too, is that, you know, you really get to kind of design and figure out the tool set that you want to use to go forward. So there's a little bit of Wild West in it, but the hardware and the OS and everything around it is really cool. I mean, it's very modern, it's very fast, it's very powerful, it's unbelievably scalable. So, you know, if you're into it for that kind of stuff, I mean, there's no shortage of just like wow moments on there either, you know. So I can't say enough about it. I mean, I'm really, really enjoying it, and I think it's worth doing because you know, I want to see the platform survive and be secure, and I have to assume that if we're coming to this realization, that the people that want to do us harm are also coming to these realizations, or probably in all likelihood are way ahead of us, right?
Okay.
So if mainframes live on, then your Twitter handle will as well, right?
Amen.
Yep.
Amen, brother.
I will say, I am not a, you know, up to my knees in assembler and debugging kind of guy. And if you're not that type of person, also don't run away from the platform, because the list of things to look at is so long. I mean, Chad and I just keep a running list of things we think up, and we're just like, oh yeah, that'd be cool to look at. And it's, you know, oh, we'll do that in 2017. So, and some of it's not really that difficult to do. I mean, I wrote a 3270 emulator in Lua for Nmap because it hadn't been done before. Not that it couldn't be done, and I'm a terrible software designer, and I can't write code for crap. But scripting engine, Nmap, easy peasy. It can't be that tough, right? It basically runs the gamut from all the way up from like the highest level policy type documentation all the way down to writing buffer overflows and figuring out how Kix buffer overflows interact with the application layer and the TN3270 layers, right? You can go the entire gamut. That's what's exciting about it to me, is there's so many opportunities in this space for research and looking at things. Sometimes it scares the crap out of me, but other times it's super exciting, because if you want to look into something, it's there for you to look at. It hasn't been done before. It's new and exciting. Despite people thinking the platform is dead and dying, and they've been saying that for 30 years, it's not going away. And it's not been looked at to the level that we are. I'm sure the NSA has looked at it in detail, and I'm sure their database of exploits is like 30 years old at this point. But it's a really interesting platform, and you can see Chad and I get super, and Cheryl as well, we get super excited to talk about it. I mean, we could just talk about it for probably forever. I mean,
and that's exactly that. And I think for somebody like me to be fairly new into the security community, and then to say, holy crap, when you introduced this concept to me, and to feel like I have to jump all over this. This is really important, and then want to share the stories with everybody else out there. It is that important. And I think raising awareness, not just in terms of the vulnerability and the fact that there are holes here that we can't turn a blind eye to anymore because of the misconceptions that people are harboring. It's important to bring that change around, just as it's important to get a whole new group of people excited about this wild west of exploit hunting and tools development. Like, wow, what a chance to get in on something and carve your own niche and make your name. That is cool.
Yeah. And that opportunity doesn't really, unless you want to do Internet of Things, no one's doing research on that. So if you want to do that, that's probably another area you can look into, because there's no blogs on that. But to me, it's also, it has sort of wide-reaching impacts. It's also what keeps me up at night. But it's I come from you don't know what you don't know. And so how many people have actually gone and done a thorough look at what's running and in their mainframe that they've been using for 40, 50, 60 plus years? Who's done that?
Good point. Yeah.
And look, I'm not saying, and I've actually said this before, IBM, they run a real tight ship in terms of code review and keeping that stuff up to date and making sure all of their code is really secure, and they have like a really great integrity program, but nobody runs a straight IBM stack, right? There is purpose-built software for flight operations. Whatever company writes that software, they might not be following the same stringent rules that IBM is following. And no one's keeping them honest the same way you keep other companies honest. Like, how much business-to-business software exists that has zero vulnerabilities in it?
That's understandable. Yeah. I mean, and you're going to have different, organizations doing different things. Their code quality is not going to be the same. So, that makes a lot of sense. I was just thinking of something earlier when we were talking about the emulators and stuff. But as a Blue Team member, let's say that we've got a pen test coming up and we find out, oh crap, Soldier Fortran's coming, or Mainframe D or Cheryl, encrypted is coming. What should be, say, 2 or 3 things that us Blue Teamers should be looking at on our mainframe, because we know that they're going to own our mainframe left and right? What should be some of the things that we're doing to making sure that we are doing what's necessary to keep our mainframe safe? I mean, obviously not having port 23 exposed to the internet would be one probably good thing, but I mean, is there other things? Port 23, 23023. Mainframers love to put it on a different port, and they're like, we're good, we're safe. It's not 23, so they can't get to it. And then you can find them at port like 9993. So so that's probably the first thing to look at. But from a Blue Team perspective, the DoD actually has a great guide on locking down ZOS for all the security products, right? We didn't really get into ACF2 or Top Secret or RACF, but basically, if you remember Windows and how you used to put Novell on top of Windows before Windows NT came out, it's the same concept. It's security products you run on the mainframe. They have a guide for each one on how to adequately lock it down, and really lock down your environment from an operating system standpoint. From there, especially from a Blue Team, the mainframe logs everything. And it'll log a lot of stuff. Now, the challenge is getting those logs from your mainframe environment into your logging platform, right? I know QRadar comes with some scripts that'll let the JCL that you run on the mainframe, and it'll import those logs into QRadar. But I don't know about the other products. But generally, you're going to want to be looking for access authorization calls, so someone's trying to access resources or failed access attempts.
right? In a mainframe environment, you shouldn't be seeing that many failed. Like if you start to see 1,000 failed account attempts, which means I'm enumerating the user space.
Yep.
You should be able to catch that fairly quickly and alert on it and have someone investigate it. And I don't think many people are today. Partially is because the logs aren't in a standard syslog format. Now, on the Unix side of ZOS, that's true. They have syslog. If you're not sending your syslogs logs from ZOS Unix into your syslog environment, you should be doing that today. There's no reason you're not doing that. SMF, which is what ostensibly is the logging platform on ZOS, it's a different beast. You need to do a lot of work to get it into a more readable format, but there's no reason why you can't just dump that garbage into Splunk and freeform queries on it.
Now,
other than people not wanting to do it.
Now, the logs on the Unix side of the mainframe, would that suffice for monitoring of the computer, or are there different logs in the SMF that won't be in the stuff that you could import into syslog?
Right. The syslog is only going to be looking at things that happen in Unix itself. It's not.
Okay.
Think of Unix more like I'm running a Windows machine and I'm also running a Unix VM, but that Unix VM has access to the file system.
Okay.
Or like running
SigWin,
like you're running SigWin on Linux. Or on
Okay.
Actually, running SigWin on Windows is probably a better analogy.
Or like an ILOM card in a Solaris box where you've got backdoor access to the box, and then the greater portion of the server is available as well. So it's like a little mini server kind of thing inside of a bigger server.
Yeah. Well, kind of. Go read the 1,900-page document on that.
I'll wait for the movie to come out.
Go read OMVS Red Books 1 through 9. But
okay.
But they're connected, but they're sort of separate environments. And so the logging that happens in the Unix side you won't see things like someone trying to access a Kix application happen in the syslogs, right? That'll be in SMF, depending how you set it up.
Right on.
And so
it all goes.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to tell Brian it all comes back to log management somehow, huh?
Yeah,
all this security stuff.
Always.
I mean, if you follow the dysystig for ZOS and have trained SOC people who know what to do when they see alerts come from the platform, it's going to be very difficult to do anything undetected on the platform.
Oh, that's
right.
Awesome.
You don't have 92,000 LPARs in the enterprise like you do, Windows servers or Windows boxes or Linux machines, right?
So unlike Windows, which has practically no logging by default, mainframes have like ultra logging out of the box.
Yeah.
It's good.
The other thing I bolt on to what he's saying as far as like what can you do, what your question, Brian, what can do right now is the original external security managers for the mainframe and generally originally they came out with the key space being like 8 characters. They were only upper 10 digits and 3 specials. Mm-hmm. And a great number of shops still run that. Now, they're capable of adding much more and going all the way up to 100 characters of like full special character ranges and everything. Mm-hmm. But because of the legacy implications of this, like a lot of shops still run those. A lot of the external security managers use single DES as their encryption for the user profiles with the passwords. And so that is the thing I would say, like, obviously you don't want your password database to get off the box, but it would be nice, and it's possible now with a lot of the newer encryption algorithms like like bcrypt and scrypt and things like that even if you do lose track of your security database, if you have a sufficiently large key space and you're using scrypt, I might post that on the internet. Like, good luck. Call me when you get through the first one. But if you're using, 8 8 upper, 10 digits, 3 special, and des, which I had a friend of mine who has a professional cracking rig do about 11 billion of those per second. It basically means if you're on the average, you're probably going to pop one user about every 30 seconds.
Wow.
You know, if you have an organization of tens of thousands of people, you're going to get through that pretty quick. And so, you know, IBM's top secret, both, you know, top secret IBM, RACF, two of the major security managers out there, both have better algorithms now that make it much harder to brute force those passwords. But also, you know, the algorithm's only part of it. You know, it's still only as good as the lowest amount of entropy. And if you're still only using 8 characters in your keys, like, that's not great. And so, you know, working to get passphrases and things like that enabled is a really good idea. Just like on any other system that where, you know, people are starting to realize that this is a great thing that people can do immediately and push their risk folks for, say, hey, how can we start getting passphrases, special characters, mixed case, new algorithms, all that stuff? Like, how can we start getting all that done? And the other thing is 2-factor authentication. There's now a number of vendors that offer 2-factor packages out there, so that you have to have, you know, your user ID, password, and maybe like an RSA token or some other kind of, you know, TOT-based token to get onto the system. Like, that is a no-brainer. I mean, in fact, I think every corporate system should have those if they're worth their salt at this point, right? I mean, that should be kind of like the price of admission.
I'm a big proponent of network segmentation and segmenting. I mean, if the mainframe really is your core, you know, of your business, and if losing that means you're not having planes fly that day, then there's no reason why anyone who gets an IP address in your enterprise can touch the mainframe. There's just no reason to be able to do that. And if you do that, that'll cut down on many of the attacks that we've developed.
Yeah, no, and you know, the top 20 from SANS, you know, limit access to things to need to know, network segmentation to separate it from the rest of the network. It's, you know, it's still just a computer. It's just a little bit more fancier than your Windows box.
It's almost like if you treated it like any other IT asset in the enterprise environment, you'd probably be all right.
Yeah.
And there's still the issues, right, around shared accounts and elevated privileges here, just like there are in other places.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, I mean, wow. So we've demystified a little bit of the mainframe. Why aren't you guys giving talks at every B-Sides, every DerbyCon and Shmoo? I mean, there's so much here. I mean, even general talks as a stable or you know, something else. I mean, this is very interesting stuff that people should be understanding and wanting to know if they're wanting to aspire to be a well-rounded pen tester. It just seems like it's a missing opportunity.
Yeah. Come to Sector, guys. Call for proposals is open this year.
So when I first started in 2012, I was like, I gave my talk at B-Sides Las Vegas, and I was like, I am done. I got the word out. People are going to pick up the torch. I don't got to do nothing no more. And I got no emails that year about mainframe security. So in 2013, I used all of my miles, all of my points to talk at ShmooCon, ThoughtCon, DEF CON. Black Hat paid for me to go to Black Hat. But basically all the Austin B-Sides, I went to everywhere where I could give a talk.
Okay.
And now I have no points.
Oh.
Well, yeah. And so I'm speaking at B-Side San Francisco, in fact, coming up very shortly. We want to talk about it. Like, we love doing this. When Cheryl suggested that we come and talk about this on this podcast, we're like, yes, when? We love doing this. We will talk to anybody, anytime about mainframe security. The challenge, well, for me personally is I just can't afford to do it. Right. It just comes down to, and also being away from family that much and work, not really that great, but
we are giving a lot of talks. I mean, like, you know, I mean, in the last year or so, I mean, we've hit, you know, 3-4 different places. You know, like Phil said, he's talking at B-Sides. I'm talking at Share in March. Okay. And we'll probably be at a couple of other places as of yet unannounced, because the CFPs haven't decided yet. But so maybe an international venture or two. But I think, you know, it's just, you know, it's just a matter of time. It's just time. I think it'll be easier to do also when more of the big firms kind of get on it. And now it's like, even the panels that read these things, I talked to the people that did it at DEF CON. It's like, some people get it, the light's on, and they absolutely get it because they understand the platform, they understand the critical nature of the platform. But other people like, well, it's interesting, but like, does anybody really use these things anymore? And so it's like, sometimes there's still just where these podcasts and stuff help are just getting people to realize that there's a thing, right? Here's a thing. It's like, yeah, we can have 4 more talks about hacking your smoke detector because that's cool. And we could maybe have one about hacking like the global financial networks. That's fun too. So it's kind of like it's a little bit of both. I mean, both of us have had talks not accepted, because it's like, we're not that interested in that. I won't mention which ones have turned it down. RSA.
I will name and shame.
Seriously.
We have submitted to RSA, not terribly interested.
They have more important things to do, like hire the CSI cyber actors to do this.
Exactly. Now, mind you, I will say, maybe
it is a little bit of an uphill battle because just for everybody who's interested in it, there are people that still haven't heard the good news yet and still have to kind of like get past that first. And some of them are on the CFP panels, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's it. Are there mainframe conventions? I mean, is that a thing?
Yeah, the one I'm presenting at in March is probably one of the longest non-vendor associated mainframe convention, which is called Share, share.org. And that is in San Antonio the first week of March. And Phil gave a keynote there last year, and I am going and giving a talk about mainframe passwords, password encryption, password cracking. Don't fear the password cracker; they are your friend. and self-encrypting drives and why they're mostly snake oil. And so taking a little bit of these topics that kind of apply to everybody, but putting a nice mainframe-centric spin on them and helping those audiences who are very technical audiences, and there's even very technical security people in there, but really bringing the more what we would consider traditional security hacker ethos kind of talk to it, right? And from what we've seen, those they love it, and Phil and I have actually talked about, it might be just as important to give talks about this kind of stuff at the industry conferences that have nothing that aren't infosec. They're like banking or insurance or government or whatever they are.
Oh, no, that's awesome. You should definitely do that. I advocate, if we go to DerbyCon and you give a talk on, how to not infosec. I'm sorry, that's the only one I can think of right now that was like word association, but you're just preaching to the choir. So if you if you talk about hacking Python or hacking something, IoT devices at an IoT convention, that makes more sense than going to DerbyCon and talking about how you hacked your toaster.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, these are the people that use the stuff, that build the stuff.
They need the awareness more than us, for a lot of that.
Yeah. And generally speaking, what I think a lot of, not all, but is missed at a lot of these conferences is, like you said, it's preaching to the choir. If I go to a mainframe conference, I was at, CA World and a couple of other mainframe conferences, and you go there and you talk just like this, like you would at a security conference. All of a sudden you've got like 3 and then 5 and then 30 people standing around you going, whoa, well, I never thought about that. Wow, that's really, it's like, holy cow, I have an audience here of people that are actually interested and get this stuff,
It's true. Cool. I can tell you for a fact, I have to do another thing that's not security related in order to, put bread on the table. And when I talk to people as part of this, I do these weekly meetings really early in the morning, and I tell them security stories. They are fascinated. Their mouths drop open because this is stuff nobody's told them. It never occurred to them. And then they come back and ask questions. But whereas if we do it within our own community, we've all heard it before, so the questions don't come and the awareness isn't at that level. And it's amazing to connect with these end users who are going to be directly hit when the mainframe gets hacked.
Yeah.
My favorite story. So I gave a keynote at Share last year around this time, and the night before the keynote, there was like a dinner reception thing, and I sat at. We didn't really talk about it, but I run a sort of side project called the Internet Mainframes Project, and it finds mainframes on the internet, takes a screenshot, and puts it on a Tumblr. I just find it interesting. I think they're pretty screenshots. I think doing that art is really hard. You have to write it in assembly because I've done it a lot now. So I have a respect for the people who actually take the time to do the art. And also it's cool to find these really weird systems on there, really weird domain names. And so, or nation state domain names. And so, so I was sitting and this guy was like, hey, I recognize you. You're giving the keynote about hacking the mainframe tomorrow. I don't think I need to attend your talk because you're not going to sway me. It's super secure. There's nothing you can do that will hack the mainframe. And I said, okay, let me show you this website on my phone. And I showed him the Internet Mainframe Project. And he's going through and he's going, oh my goodness. Oh boy, that's really bad. Oh, I can't believe theirs is on there. Wow. And I asked him, I said, well, why does it matter if it's, he's going, oh, this is terrible. I can't believe these things are internet facing. And I asked him, like, well, if the system is so secure that you don't think you need to go and attend a talk about how to hack it by someone who's doing it, but you see them on the mainframe, you see them on the internet, and you think that that's a terrible thing, why does it matter if it's, like, if I have the world's most secure car, doesn't matter what neighborhood I leave it in, it's secure. It's not going to get broken into, right? And he was like, oh, I see what you've done here. I'm now I'll be at your talk tomorrow. Good job. Okay. But it takes that. Listen, I don't have enough time to talk to everybody on the planet about this. And what Chad was alluding to, we're just two people, and we would love for more. Well, three now. Thank you, Cheryl. But we would love more people to get engaged and to be talking about this. Like I said, there are so many research avenues that Chad and I could submit multiple talks to Derby, and maybe get one or two of them accepted. Right? There's just so much space here to grow.
Excellent.
But I will say this: if you're interested in mainframe and mainframe security, go to Share. Share is probably the best conference I've been to for mainframes and mainframe security and mainframe hacking and whatnot. And so, if you're doing that, it's really, is it as fun as DEF CON? No. But you'll probably learn a lot more about mainframe and mainframe security than you would anywhere else. Yeah.
So you could also go to like supercomputer consortium. Is supercomputers and mainframes are the same? Yes.
No.
Okay. I didn't know if maybe a mainframe was just a smaller supercomputer. Because
maybe it used to be, but I wouldn't put it in that class. I don't know that there's a I don't know that supercomputer is really a thing that is like, I think it's just kind of a catch-all, but I don't really ever hear anybody refer to mainframes as supercomputers.
Okay. Because when my first experience with anything not a Windows or a Linux box, when I was in the Navy, I sat at a Windows box running Hummingbird Exceed, which I didn't know what it was at the time. I just knew it was an icon I had to double click on. And our Cray 8 processor supercomputer was crunching numerical weather models. Mm-hmm. And we bought a used 16 processor one so we could do Y2K testing. And my job was to make sure that, the little blue box would come up and say the weather model was done. I did not realize what it was at the time. I think it was probably like I was looking at an output from the Unix side or whatever it is of the Cray supercomputer telling me that things were going on. I had no idea what Exceed was. It just was an icon I had to click on and run on my desktop. I was 18, 19 at the time, so I was kind of ignorant about it. But yeah, I look at it now and I was like, man, I was like hooked directly into a supercomputer at one time. I just couldn't do anything on it.
Well, IBM does make supercomputers, and they make them specifically for like things like weather modeling and whatnot.
Okay.
But
and we should say that we keep talking about the mainframe like it's a thing. There really is no such thing anymore as that. So just to clarify, because I have had IBM, rightly so, calling me out on this before of not making this distinction. So IBM makes a piece of hardware, and the hardware is called a Z-series hardware, right? And so that hardware can run multiple different operating systems. Oh. There's a couple, 3 or 4 of them that are publicly available, that are very common. They also have some very, very specific ones run by governments and research laboratories and things like that. But so ZOS is what's considered ZOS is what's considered, mostly people consider mainframe. They're talking about ZOS, which was MVS, but there's also ZVM, which is a virtualization platform. There's Z Linux, which was their own kind of flavor of Linux, of SUSE Linux. But now they also have this Linux One, which you've probably seen if you've seen any of IBM's marketing. So they're running canonical supported version of Ubuntu on System Z hardware, and basically it's Ubuntu. So you can run all of your Linux apps on this thing, and it's it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, actually
you can use the System Z hardware, which has up to 128 CPUs and terabytes of memory and petabytes of disk and all this other really amazing, super fast underlying hardware. And once you've got the hardware layer and the kernel laid down, it's just Linux. So that makes it really accessible. But when we talk about mainframes, we're talking about ZOS running on a System Z hardware. But the System Z hardware runs other things like TPS and some other stuff that people will refer to. Sometimes they refer to as mainframe. But when we say mainframe, that's what we're talking about. Just to there are other things, and really the mainframe as a thing doesn't exist. I mean, different people refer to it as different things, but now there are, if you were correctly speaking about this, you would talk about it as ZOS running on System Z. That's how it's
and now if you want to play around with Linux One, you can just go to the IBM Linux One website and they'll let you try one for free right now. If you just want to just play around on that environment. Now that's just Linux. Like if you know Linux, you know Linux. It's no different, right? But what Chad was saying is we're specifically targeting for now ZOS. That doesn't mean some of this stuff isn't also applicable to the other environments like ZVM and whatnot, especially the assembler and architecture level stuff that Chad does. But for now, just because it's the most widely used but least researched, that's primarily why we're focused on ZOS.
Sure. And do you think they're trying to do Linux One because the gray beardy old school people are kind of going away, and it's just easier to stuff a mainframe into a Linux kernel?
Yeah, I think what they've got a remarkable piece of hardware. I mean, the Z series is absolutely an unbelievable, remarkable hardware in terms of what it's capable of doing. Fault tolerance. There are mainframes that have literally zero downtime because of how they're configured. And that hardware is absolutely remarkable, and it all comes from it's kind of like the Apple scenario, right? It all comes from one vendor, so they can really build a pretty polished package and you can call them and talk to the person who wrote the microcode for the particular card that's having the problem, right? There's something of value in that, but I think what they've got is a remarkable platform here, and they realize that look, the world runs on Linux, right? I mean, a great deal of stuff, and I think they've finally figured out that there's a tremendous amount of open source tools, open source knowledge out there. If they merge these worlds, I mean, it could really open up some stuff. I don't see it as it's not a ZOS replacement, immediately, and I don't think it may never be, frankly, because Linux at a kernel level doesn't have some of the things that ZOS has, but it is a pretty remarkable system that I think people will realize that what they can do on it in terms of density, in terms of the number of virtual machines or the number of database instances or the number of transactions they can run on this thing compared to a cluster of x86 boxes for dollar might just blow their mind. In terms of total cost of ownership, I think it might be pretty remarkable. Wait and see. It's still pretty new, but I think that's where they're going with it.
Chad is the obviously regional sales manager.
I get
kickbacks.
Yeah, right.
I get kickbacks from every one of them. I mean, I'm just
all the T-shirts you want.
Yeah, I'm just a fanboy. Honestly, I don't get anything out of this. In fact, every time we make one podcast, I'm sure there's people in IBM that are groaning and clutching their speakers, going, "Oh God, what are they going to say?" But we're doing this not because we have access to grind. I mean, we love it, and we love the platform, and think it's worth, and are in awe of the people that build it and support it on a day in and day out basis. We're just trying to bring it to the masses and get more people involved in it.
Right on. Holy cow, we are We went long this time. I do want to find out what y'all are going to be doing in the near future. I just wanted to get some final thoughts from Mr. Betcher, and then maybe from Cheryl and Phil and Chad. So go ahead, Mr. Betcher. Maybe give us a little idea as to what you've learned today.
Well, I don't know, if you're young, you want to do some pen testing, you're not sure where your niche is, maybe you're still in school, and you might want to check this out. It sounds pretty interesting, and there is a lot of room for growth in this area. I'm thinking from what Chad and Phil were saying. You could be a pioneer in some of the hacks that have been done before. What's old is new again, right? With mainframes.
Nice. Cheryl, how about you?
Okay, well, it's a delight to be back on this podcast with you and to talk to you, Mr. Betcher. It's just a real pleasure to work with both you guys, Phil and Chad, and I love what you're doing. So, getting my pom-poms out here just to raise awareness and really make a contribution to this, because I can't wait to find people. I've got a Padawan in mind for you, Hunter, if you're listening, and I'm gonna take this offside later and get you guys set up.
Okay. All right. How about you, Phil?
Well, first I want to say thanks for letting us talk at length about this. I think my throat hurts from talking so much, but the key takeaway for me is nothing is inaccessible. If anything, this platform is too accessible. You can read up about everything online, and but I'll say this: if you are interested about it, it'll seem daunting at first. Just stick with it and keep plowing through, and it'll pay off. Trust me. But you have to have that attitude of like, nothing's going to stand in my way or stop me from doing this.
Excellent. Chad, how about you?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Brian. I'm really glad, and thanks to Cheryl, who's like a brilliant technical mind and also like a fantastic PR person. I can't really say enough. Like, she's fabulous. So
agreed.
Yeah, we have so much passion about this. So I guess I would caution anybody asking us any questions, because we have a lot to talk about. If you're going to be at Share or are interested in that sort of thing, or around San Antonio, like, I'm going to be down there at the beginning of March, and there'll probably be some upcoming stuff. So watch for that on Twitter or on the blogs or whatever. There'll be some tools coming out and things like that this year. So, but by all means, if you've questions about this stuff, like the anecdotes that Phil and I were giving, we love to answer questions and help steer people in the right direction. For those people that are sticking with it, that's fabulous. So thank you, and thanks, Brian, and I really appreciate your having us on.
No, that's awesome. So I really would like to thank Cheryl as well. She was one who helped set all this up, and it was something really I wanted to do for a long time. And I was actually trying to get Big Indian Smalls to say hey at DerbyCon, because his lady friend actually won the ticket. But she could not go at the last minute, so he actually hooked somebody up there at DerbyCon with a ticket. So it was nice to be able to give somebody an opportunity to go to Derby. But yeah, I've always wanted to understand these things, mainframes and how they work, and the security behind them. And it's good to see that there are people on the front lines making them more secure and educating people on them as well. So it's very nice. So. Thank you all for coming. Cheryl, Phil, and Chad, where would people get a hold of you if they wanted to? I know Twitter is big for all three of you, but if you're going to be doing, I know you're doing Share, but is there any other ways they could get a hold of you by email or LinkedIn? If somebody's hiring for mainframe people, would they?
Yep. I'm on LinkedIn under my name. I've a personal email, which is mainframe@bigendiansmalls.com, or Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, like when I'm awake, basically. So it's a good way to reach out.
Right on. Okay. Phil, how about you?
Twitter, Gmail, Tumblr, all three. Tumblr, I will be honest, I don't really check the messages there, but all three is mainframed with a D 767 at gmail.com, or Twitter or Tumblr. That's probably like Twitter, Gmail is 100% the best way to get a hold of me. If you happen to be at B-Side San Francisco, I will also be there giving a talk. So
very cool.
Come seek me out.
Okay. And last but not least, Miss Cheryl, how would people get a hold of you?
Well, I have a serious Twitter habit, so yes, you can always find me pretty much every hour at Encrypted lead speak. So you'll find it pretty easily. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Mr. Betcher, how do people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
On Twitter at BetcherPwned, or you can check out IMF Security as well.
Okay, right on.
.com.
Nice. So the official Breaking Down Security podcast is at BrakeSec, BRAKE Sec. I live, eat, breathe, and enjoy the Twitters. I am on at Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE. You can find our website is breakingsecurity.com, BRAKEING security.com. And I'm going to find the last known published link in our podcast list here so I can give you a list of places where you can get a hold of the podcast if you want to listen to it. Jay Schulman, of course, this will be a couple of weeks old when it comes out, but Jay Schulman interviewed us on building a life in security, a career in security. So if you want to hit him up on there, you can. We are on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio. We're on the Google Play Store. We're on Tumblr. We have an RSS feed. Our Gmail account is bds.podcast@gmail.com. We're on iTunes. Please feel free to leave feedback on there if you loved this podcast like I did. Unfortunately, I can't put feedback on my own podcast. Apparently, they don't like that. So, awesome having you lady and gentlemen on. And you're always welcome to come back to help educate our listeners on anything else you guys would like to talk about. So, it was great having y'all on.
Total pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
All right. That was it for this week's Breaking Down Security. Please come back and listen to us again real soon. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.